The rule of law is the foundation of the European Union. Its threatening collapse today is the Union's most severe crisis, a more dangerous one than Brexit. At ECFR, our focus is foreign policy, but we don't forget that for the EU to be a strong international actor, it is imperative to defend the core principles the Union is based on. In our polling, we have found a striking result that 1/3 of all those polled, or a plurality of Europeans, want the EU to be a beacon of democracy and rule of law. It is our imperative as Europeans to design adequate responses to the rising autocratic tide threatening the future of the European project. It is a topic we will continue to work on.
Good morning. Thank you to Piotr, our friend Piotr Buras, who's been doing a lot of very important work on this issue of the rule of law. So this is the last panel of this conference. It's a hybrid panel, I'm afraid, and I was thinking, listening to the last panel, that we should include hybrid panels in the list of hybrid threats, because this is one of the biggest challenges for moderators, but I'm sure we have excellent speakers, so we'll overcome this threat. So we have already joining us from Brussels, Commissioner Věra Jourová. Welcome, thank you very much for being with us this morning. Here in person, Senator Bogdan Klich from Poland. Thank you very much for joining us here. And later on, for the last half hour, we'll have from Paris, joining us also online, Clément Beaune, the French Secretary of State for European Affairs, who is not able to join us right now because he is welcoming a very important visitor in Paris, which is Chancellor Olaf Scholz. So we'll have first-hand report about his arrival a little bit later on. So we're going to talk about the rule of law. The issue has replaced, over the past couple of years, this issue has replaced budgetary issues or common agricultural policy as the main headache of the European Union. And it's probably a more serious problem than those, because it is seen as many of us as existential for the European Union. A lot of leaders or politicians have noticed that our system was conceived as if this issue was never going to happen or to surge, because we thought that the rule of law, we took it for granted in a way among member states. So this is a new situation that the Commission and the member states have been trying to grapple with. And so, Commissioner Jourová, I'm going to start with you and ask you, the Commission has been leading with the tools that were available to it and trying to invent new tools as well, has been making efforts to protect the rule of law. So what is 2022 going to be the year when those efforts finally come to fruit or prove effective?
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me. I really don't want to become the hybrid thread, but I'm happy to be invited to the hybrid debate. At least it's better, of course, to meet personally. What will happen in 2022? I am convinced that the breaches of rule of law in member states have to cost some money. And this should happen next year, because we will apply in full the conditionality of for the spending of EU money, for which we already have the regulation in place since the 1st January this year. But if you allow me to give you a little bit broader picture of what we are doing, or what should be done, I fully agree with Piotr Buras that it is imperative to protect democracy and rule of law in the EU, that it is the existential threat if we are not efficient on that. And this is interesting now when we are running the conference on the future of Europe, when we are inviting normal citizens, not the politicians, not the people from any bubbles, who are telling us we fear that democracy could not survive the current crisis, also the transitions. And so it shows that this is not an abstract thing. When we speak about democracy and rule of law, the people are aware that this is about their rights and about their access to justice and about their right to have independent judge. So this is also what I wanted when we started to address the issues in Poland and in Hungary and some worrying trends in some other member states, that it is not just the abstract thing for the lawyers, but this is something which is noticed by the society. And as you said, Madam Moderator, there was in the past some, I would call it a lack of imagination, that this degradation or erosion of the rule of law might happen in the EU. Till 2015, I would say, we lived in some kind of naive illusion that these principles will be with us forever and that we will not need to protect them in a stronger way. So I have to say that the Commission found out that we are not sufficiently equipped to address the issues and the worrying trends and the attacking on the primacy of EU law and similar things, independent judiciary. So we are applying all the tools we have. And it is first and foremost the early dialogue with the member states. We have a lot of infringement procedures launched, and we are winning the cases at the European Court of Justice, because all the cases we are sending to Luxembourg are I think, very, very strongly based on our legal competence and with very, very strong justification. And we already triggered Article 7 for Hungary and Poland. And now we have the conditionality, which refers, where I want to refer to what I said at the beginning, that it also has to cost some money. And so we are enriching the toolbox by these new measures. We have the annual rule of law report. You asked about 2022, so next year it will be the first annual rule of law report, which will contain recommendations to the member states, especially relating to some worrying trends or some concerns. And last thing I want to say on this rule of law report, we are putting an end on what I would call salami method or salami way of looking at the issues in the rule of law in the member states. What I mean by that, in the rule of law report, we are not only covering judiciary sector and the sector of justice, but also the media situation, the anti-corruption measures taken by the member states, and the checks and balances. And by taking this broader perspective, we are able to better cover or describe how we see the situation in the member states, using the same methodology for all, the same channels of information, the same criteria for assessment. And what we have achieved through this rule of law, annual rule of law report, is a very thorough analysis of 27 unique systems. We do not have any one-size-fits-all. situation, or the Commission does not push the member states to copy paste what works in another member state, but what we are pushing for are the standards and are the high criteria for the independence of justice and independent and pluralism of media and some other things. So we have enriched our toolbox, and for the next year I think that we will even be stronger in our response using these new tools.
May I follow up before I give the floor to Senator Klich? You say you have enriched your toolbox, which is true. There's been a lot of comments about this, and particularly about conditionality. So what we are seeing now is that the first tranche of the recovery fund is not being disbursed for Poland and Hungary. What is the next step? What is the Commission going to watch the implementation of the commitments made by Poland, for instance, on the ground? What will be the next step?
I want to make one clarification that also the budget conditionality also refers to recovery funding, because I sometimes get questions on this. But at the same time, and this is a parallel process, we are finalizing or we are still reading or negotiating the recovery plans for Poland and Hungary, because we still do not have or have not received strong enough commitments that both countries will introduce the necessary reforms. For Hungary, these are reforms which stem from the country-specific recommendations. For Poland, we are very concrete because we want three things from Poland: to dismantle or to stop the functioning of the disciplinary chamber, in line with the court ruling of the European Court of Justice ruling, to reform the disciplinary regime, which will withstand the high criteria set for disciplinary regimes in Europe. And the third thing, to enable the judges who have been sanctioned by the disciplinary chamber, enable them to come back to work and annul the decisions regarding concrete people. So very concrete requirements. We want to see the commitments from the Polish side, and so the negotiations are ongoing, and we mean it seriously. We have to also stick with the principles, and these are very, very serious things we want.
So that means that as long as those three steps are not taken by Poland, they will not get the first tranche of the recovery fund. Is that correct?
I don't want to predict the development, but I think that it is quite clear that the Commission will insist on this. Mm-hmm. So it's on the side of Poland to recognize that what we want, these three conditions, this is nothing what the Commission invented. Mm-hmm. This is based on the Court of Justice ruling. So I think nobody should be surprised that these are things which we insist to see done in Poland.
Thank you very much. We'll come back to you with more questions. Senator Klich, so you've heard the Commissioner. Can you explain to us what is the logic behind this, behind the position of Poland, and what can we expect? What do you think we can expect? Of course, you are not the one making those decisions today, but how do you see it from where you sit in the Senate?
Thank you very much for this invitation and for this opportunity to share not only my assessment of the situation within the European Union. I will not concentrate only on Poland or Hungary. I will try to present a broader view, because what was going on and what is going on in my country and in Hungary, it is not the only example of what was going on and what will go on in other European countries if the populist or nationalist or populist and nationalist movements will have the chance to take the power. So this is the the challenge for Europe as a whole and European Union in particular. In my country, the process is logical, and the objective of this process is to have unlimited power, but the executive branch, supported by legislative branch of the current ruling camp, for as long as possible. So from this point of view, dismantling of independent judiciary was the first step that the ruling camp started at the end of 2015, and I hope that everybody knows, everybody remembers, those chapters in this book. The first one, it was subordination of the Constitutional Tribunal, that in our constitutional system should play the role and played this role for 25 years of the guardian of the Constitution. Then we had another important step. It was subordination to the political power of National Council of Judiciary, the institution that was paradoxically invented by underground solidarity at the end of 80s and presented at the beginning of our new independence in 1989 as the heritage of solidarity. So it was a paradox, that this government, having roots in solidarity camp, dismantled dismantled National Council of Judiciary as a guardian of independence of Polish courts. So it was the second step. And the third step, it was an assault on Supreme Court. This process hasn't been completed yet. Mm-hmm. This process hasn't been completed yet because there is still a group of a little bit more than 50% of judges within the Supreme Court that were appointed legally according to the rules that are in compliance with the Constitution. So still the process is on track. By the new president of the Supreme Court has been selected. So we are in the middle of this process of subordination of the Supreme Court to the executive power. And because of a strong resistance of independent judges, supported by the society, not only by the street movements, but also ordinary people. Also ordinary people. In the streets of my country, even in smaller cities and villages of Poland, this process is still at the beginning. More than 90% of Polish judges are in favor of their independence. That's a crucial data because more than 10% of current judges, more than 10%, were appointed by the new government according to new rules. It means that there is a group within this group of newly appointed judges that are still in favor of objective judgments, objective rulings, etc., etc. So it means that even if the umbrella protecting in every country independence of judiciary, independence of judges, independence of courts was completely closed, and even when the Muzzle Act, so-called Muzzle Act, was introduced as a means against independence of judiciary, majority of judges, including those who were appointed recently, are in favor of objectivity. This is a great value, of recent 25 years of independence of judiciary in Poland, that in hearts and in the minds of majority of judges, objectivity is a crucial value. That's why, speaking about the future and speaking about the situation in Europe, once again, I would like to broaden a little bit the perspective and to say that we hope that European Commission, Mrs. Jourová, will be more active. We hope that the European Commission will present more consistent approach to this issue. We hope that European Commission will not only concentrate on one of the chambers of the Supreme Court, this newly created according to one of the legal acts, but also on the other aspects of let's say, violations of independence of judiciary in Poland and in the other countries.
So you don't
this is absolutely crucial.
You don't want the Commission to apply the salami method, is that right?
Yeah. Yes, and I would like that to focus only on the disciplinary chamber of Polish Supreme Court. It means to forget that there is another chamber created according to the same rules. I mean the Chamber on Extraordinary Affairs that is in charge of assessing the final results of all general elections in my country. Parliamentary elections, presidential elections, European elections. So for the democracy itself, I mean democratic procedures, is absolutely crucial. So not only disciplinary chamber should be in the heart of the interest of the European Commission. And more broadly, I would encourage European Commission to take such a horizontal approach concerning all the values described so clearly in the Article 2 of the Lisbon Treaty. Because the Article 2 of the Lisbon Treaty is still, I hope, the basis for the European construction. So let's not forget about the other aspects of this article, as well as let's not forget about the preamble of the Washington Treaty from 1949 that speaks about the same values. Values should be in the center, in the focus of our interest. I know that Mrs. Jourová and European Commission, including Commissioner Reinders currently, do as much as possible in this case. But such a broader approach is important to avoid. In other countries of the European Union, the processes that could lead us to the disintegration of the European common space. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Jourová, you're on record saying that democracy is not only about elections, right? And that we have this, we've been having this issue more and more often, unfortunately. So, but do you want to respond to Senator Klich?
Yeah, thank you very much. If I may shortly add something on the recovery plan, and I will react on Mr. Senator because it was just he challenged me on several things which I want to explain. Speaking about the financial sanctions, either discussion about the recovery fund or the conditionality, I have to say we also have in mind very, very strongly Polish and Hungarian people and the regions and the municipalities and the organizations helping in social services. Well, this is not an easy choice also for the European Union to sanction financially the state where there are people who need European help and European support. So this is just to add that this is not that easy to say we will sanction. And now on what Mr. Senator said, and especially on the Polish reform, and then to defend Commission a little bit. So on the Polish reform, I really do not see any winners of it. And the senator said that it has not finished yet, that it is planned, as there is a long-term strategic plan probably, which is fulfilled gradually and per partes. But I don't see any winner. I only see losers. And on both sides, on Polish side and the European side, weakening Poland in the international scene, investing money and time on both sides, putting in risk and uncertainty the whole European justice area, where it is all, the whole thing of European justice area is dependent on mutual trust and certainty that the systems of checks and balances and the rule of law work in all the member states. But for me, who is the biggest loser is the citizen who has the right for independent judge, and this right has been deprived. He was deprived of this right. So I don't understand that. And I really would like to see some positive signs, but this is not the case of these days. For the Commission, what we are doing to work on rule of law agenda, I only hear two reactions. You are doing too little, and the other reaction is you should not do anything because this is about the sovereign state. And I have to say that what the Commission is doing, we are following and very strictly keeping and respecting the rule of law for ourselves. So we work with the competences we have. We are active, but we are not activistic or activist. And this is what I want to stress, that Commission is predictable in what we are doing. We are not using salami method because when we invented the rule of law report, which is covering the broad picture in all the member states, this is our attempt to get rid of the salami method. What we heard many times from Warsaw, look at Spain and the Spanish National Council for Judiciary, they have the rules like that. But you or look at Germany, how they do things. But you cannot just tear out of the context some elements. You have always to look at the whole picture of the checks and balances in the country. So the rule of law report serves this purpose, to see the whole thing, including the media and corruption. And not all the rule of law issues can be addressed by infringement procedures. That's why we triggered the Article 7, where we are covering the matters which cannot be addressed by the infringement procedures. And this is what the senator spoke about. Why aren't we covering other things relating to Supreme Court? Well, this is under the debate on the systemic breaches which we identified in Poland and which need to be discussed with the member states in the council. It will be interesting to hear from Clément Beaune how the presidency is getting ready for these discussions, because I always saw the effort both from Poland and Hungary to keep it just as a legal issue, but it is a political issue, and it is the issue relating to trust between the member states. Last comment, also a reaction on Mr. Senator. We are taking horizontal approach. We are only not putting all the Article 2 things into one vehicle or one tool. So on the rule of law, I have described what we are doing and using. For the fundamental rights, we have adopted the strategy on the implementation of fundamental rights, and we will have and we are having now already very vivid discussion with the member states on the implementation. We are looking at concrete things, concrete gaps. So this is covered quite well. And the third thing, in this holy trinity, how I call it sometimes, rule of law, fundamental rights and democracy. So the third thing is, I think, very well covered by the European Democracy Action Plan, which is, by the way, also discussed in the Democracy Summit in these days, organized by United States, because there we are indicating the plan how to protect democracy in the sense of protecting elections, strengthening independent media, and fighting against disinformation, which is the hybrid threat you spoke about at the beginning. So we take this horizontal approach, and when you compare what the Commission did in the past, well, it's a much bigger thing what we are doing now, for obvious reason that we have to react on worsening reality. And if you want to reply to me, maybe you are doing a lot, we want to see the results, I am aware of it, we have to see all these tools functioning in practice and bringing some fruit.
Thank you very much. I must say I like very much the portrait which is behind you on the wall of Václav Havel, and it reminds us of those times when we didn't think that we would have all these issues to discuss, right?
I am consulting with Václav Havel every day.
Really, are you?
In a hybrid way.
But one
In
thing
hybrid way,
he's
yeah.
advising to me, one thing which is he's advising to me, be humble, and respect the sovereign states, and do your job, obeying your obligations. So this is the advice I think I might get from Václav Havel.
That's very good. Okay, thank you. I see that Clément Beaune is now with us. Bonjour. Thank you very much for being with us. And so is Chancellor Scholz in Paris already?
I can testify he is. I welcome him at the airport, and he must now be with the president.
Very good. Very good. And I guess you'll get back to that lunch later, right, with him. So we have been discussing, as you know, it's the issue, the subject of this panel, the rule of law. And President Macron addressed this issue yesterday in his press conference. And he said two things, actually, which I thought were interesting. One is that he expects results, that the efforts from the Commission, he called it the difficult dialogue between the Commission and Poland, would probably bear fruit in the next few months or few weeks. So I don't know if you can shed some light on this. And also he said, with Poland and Hungary and countries which are causing trouble with the rule of law, he said we have to understand why they act like this. This is one thing. And he also said we have to think of this not only in terms of sanctions, but also in terms of incentives, if I can translate it this way. So could you tell us more precisely what he has in mind? What is the French view of this?
Thank you very much. Maybe to start with the most important part of this reasoning and presentation, I think, and following what Věra Jourová just said, we will be very active on this rule of law discussions during the French presidency. I think, if I try to sum up with my own words, 4 years ago, when President Macron presented the French vision of Europe, we insisted a lot, and I think rightly so, on European sovereignty. And to go very quickly, I think this idea is now more shared, enshrined in the European DNA, in the European software, and the way we act, whether it's defense, whether it's strategic technologies, whether it's climate, and so on. What I think we collectively underestimated over the last years, and it's been changing probably the last 18 months, 2 years, I would say roughly, it's the importance of values, which is linked. I don't want to be too long on this, but of course, if we are seen as not credible on our own values, the way they are shared within the EU, respected, complied with, and so on, we have a huge problem for the European project itself, but also for this sovereignty, power, autonomy agenda beyond. I think it's not anecdotal or secondary, it's a key issue. And probably the tools we have, which the President insisted on, were not adapted to a situation that we live now, because we thought that kind of spontaneously, automatically, when a country would be in the EU, would join the EU, the path towards respecting rights, creating more rights and freedoms, implementing them would be natural on a one-way street. We see it's not the case, even within our EU club. That's why sometimes, let's be frank, and Vice President Jourová is doing a great job, but we are still a bit weak because the toolbox we have was not thought for this type of situation originally. So during the French presidency, we will use at maximum level this toolbox, whether it's procedures of Article 7, I will be chairing the General Affairs Council where we discuss this type of thing with Commissioner, with Vice President Jourová. We will go on with that, with these hearings and this political pressure, which I think is important. We will also implement a new tool, which I think is extremely important and powerful, much more powerful than the ones we have now, which is called the conditionality regulation, which was agreed actually unanimously at 27 in July 2020 and later in 2020 last December. And now we are waiting for the decision of the European Court of Justice. Then the Commission, Věra could elaborate on that, but will probably activate it, and we will have the debate in the Council during the spring. And this is much more powerful, as I said, because you make a link between some EU funding and the respect and some core values of the rule of law elements and basis. This we will go on with. But what President Macron said is that first we cannot, and I really always insist on that, describe this issue, this vital issue, as a fight against countries, as a bilateral fight or a fight against one or two countries in the EU or one or two societies in the EU. It would be a misinterpretation, I think, and the best way to help the political forces and sometimes the political leaders in Hungary, in Poland, for instance, which say they are against us, they are against our model, they are against our own national specific values. Let's not do this gift. And it's not even, I think, I do believe this, an East-West fight. First, because there are a lot of political forces, governments, countries, all over what we call sometimes too simplistically in France, Eastern Europe or Central and Eastern Europe. There are a lot of people and governments, most of them, who want to share these values and who do share these values, which are EU values. And symmetrically, we see in a lot of so-called Western countries, including my country, in the political debate, in the campaign we have now, people, political forces, candidates who just use the same rhetoric, the same attacks on political liberalism, and so on and so forth. So it's a vital fight because it is a concern for all of us everywhere in Europe. And we have, final point, to understand some. This is where the national specificities can be taken into account, for real. We have to take into account the deep reasons why this has happened. This is not an excuse, this is not a weakness, this does not prevent us from using the tools I was describing, but we have to understand the demographic issues, the economic and political transitions, especially in some parts of Eastern Europe, which were seen as sometimes brutal, and which were maybe in some cases. If we don't understand why a lot of people, young people, leave this country, leaving in place the most conservative forces, why this nationalistic narrative is very powerful in some countries and unfortunately in more and more countries. If we don't demonstrate that you can be pro-European, politically liberal, and at the same time address people's concerns, be less naive, more protective at the European level, whether it's social agenda, digital regulation, climate rules, and so on. If we don't do that, we will give more space to these forces. So when we say firmness, using our tools with no hesitation on the one hand, but also understanding, addressing the core reasons why this movement against rights and freedoms has happened in some places and a lot of places in Europe, we do not the whole thing. I think we need to pursue this whole comprehensive approach, if I may say.
And so President Macron is going to Budapest on Monday, and he will presumably meet the 4 leaders of the Visegrad countries. And I suppose this will be on the agenda, this question. So what can we expect? What will he also said that compromise was possible. On what lines do you see a compromise?
Well, there are short-term issues and deeper issues. On the current issues we are discussing, how in different cases Poland and Hungary make a move to comply with some core requests which are coming from the EU, not France in particular, even if we do support the European Commission, of course, but from the EU as a whole, and sometimes, even more important, I would say, from the European Court of Justice. It's not a political decision that we decided, it's sometimes rulings, that's the case for Poland on some issues that are not implemented, and we cannot tolerate that the European Court of Justice make a decision on such fundamental issues and is not respected, and sometimes even more attacked by these governments and non-independent tribunals in some countries like Poland. So in the short run, there is a discussion in particular on the recovery plans, and the European Commission has said that there are some criteria which are not met and which have a link with rule of law. The European Commission has a discussion with Poland and with Hungary. Personally, I think that there is a chance to get a compromise with Poland if they are committing themselves and actually implementing a reform of the judiciary system, which would be a demonstration, a clear evidence that European political pressure is helpful to protect rights. We'll see. The Polish government has given some signals that it would be available to do so. It's up to him. If this government in Warsaw is making a move on the legal judicial reform, then we can, the European Commission will be more flexible, on the recovery plan. It will not solve the whole thing, of course. With Hungary, to be very frank, I don't expect the Hungarian government, the Orban government, in the short run, because they have elections in April, to be clear, that they will make move to unlock the recovery plan. What they have said so far, but it's again up to them, is we don't need this money, we can wait, and we have no intention to backtrack on some extremely problematic reforms like the anti-LGBT law, which was adopted last June. So I expect a frank discussion. I don't expect Mr. Orban to change his political software all of a sudden, of course, but it's still necessary. We are the upcoming presidency to discuss, and I think it's also right because Hungary is the host and the head of the V4 for a year, the Visegrad group, so we need these discussions, but exactly as President Macron will say very directly and frankly to Viktor Orban the disagreements we have on this fundamental issue. He will also meet, for instance, the new Slovak Prime Minister and Czech Prime Minister, which are on a different line and which are, I hope, much better advocates and of EU law on EU values. So it's important to say also that even in the V4 group, it's not an anti-rule of law group. You have a big, strong divide on this issue within this V4 group, with Hungary and Poland not being followed by the Czech Republic and the Slovakian government, especially with the new leaders in these two countries. So it's interesting here again to see that we have interlocutors on which we can, with whom we can discuss in this same region to defend and to promote rule of law and to give also the signal that it's not all countries in this region which are promoting or defending an alternative model. It's not true. Most of these countries, including these two countries I mentioned in the V4 group, are in favor of being very committed to rule of law and to EU values.
Thank you very much. So before I give a chance to Vice President Jourová and Senator Klich to react, I would want to also give a chance to our audience to ask questions. Okay, we have, so why don't you come to the mic and Mrs. Jourová, do you want to react now or do you want to wait for the questions? Do you want to react to what Clément Beaune just said?
Me too.
Yeah, okay. We can't hear you. I think you're muted or... No?
I
Okay.
should be,
Yeah, we
correct?
can hear you
Is it-
now.
Yeah. I don't want to occupy too much space and time here. I want to react quickly on Clément. I am really grateful for what he's saying and what Mr. President Macron is saying, that you want to understand the reasons for the tensions. That's great that President will speak to V4 leaders because working on these things where it's always a question whether there are possible compromises, because we are in the field of values. So also speaking about compromises, I always want to hear in what sense and in what direction. But speaking about the values and all the problems we see in Poland and Hungary, I am in double fire because I come from the region. I come from the Czech Republic, and that's why, of course, it's important for me to see what's happening there, but also to explain in the West, if I can simplify, what might be the reasons why the liberal democracy is losing power and arguments in that region. Because sometimes what I hear from the West is, look at the East, they are not grateful enough. We have invited them to our rich table and they are not following the rules or values. The reality is much more complicated. So it's great that the dialogue will happen. And last comment, as this Clément is absolutely right. This can happen everywhere in Europe, because we hear the nationalist and populist rhetoric everywhere. In the French presidential elections, there will be a lot of it, I'm sure. And so my message is that we have to deserve the victory for the liberal democracy. We simply have to do much more, and we have to follow what the people want and what the people fear of, because we neglected something in the past.
Thank you very much. Senator Klich.
Let me have two remarks concerning this great presentation, a great French presentation. I would be more than delighted if President Macron, during his visit to Budapest, has a meeting also with the representative of the united opposition. Mr. Marquisai represents political forces and non-governmental organizations that decided to unify, challenging Viktor Orban. And he has a great European message that he delivered recently in a variety of places. One of them, it was Warsaw. We had the chance to discuss with him the future. And he's a promising politician. So it would be great to see President Macron meeting also with him. That's first. Second one. At the end of French presidency, there should be the end of the Conference on the Future of Europe. I don't want to exaggerate. I don't want to say that it is a kind of political event replacing traditional IGCs before the changes of the treaties, because there is no mood for the change of the Lisbon Treaty. But this is the first time that citizens and organizations of citizens were allowed to express their opinions on a variety of issues. Now we are in a chaotic part of this process, but I believe, you know, that it will be a possibility of putting in order those attempts. The rule of law is one of the crucial aspects of this conference, and I suppose that what will be at the end of this conference should be also promoted very strongly by the French presidency as an achievement of Europeans. So let me remind you also about that and express the hope that when the Europeans want to have more Europe in particular issues, it is not the same as the convention at the beginning of this century wanted to have more Europe everywhere. But there is a need of Europeans to have more Europe in particular areas. And the rule of law is one of them. So this is a kind of enhancement.
Okay. Thank you very much. No, I have a decision to make because the time is running fast. So I'm going to take 3 questions, and then Clément Beaune, if you don't mind, you can answer Senator Klich and whatever questions we have. So Tara Varma first, please. Yeah, and then I'll take 2 more.
Thanks a lot. 2 questions. We have a sense that once a country is inside the EU, there is actually little that can be done to nudge it in a direction. We've heard that there is political and financial pressure that might be working for Poland, but Hungary seems to be doubling down on its rhetoric. Could you maybe tell us how to mitigate this sense of powerlessness? And second question, we're in a foreign policy conference right now, and I was wondering, how do you think this impacts the credibility of the EU to be an international norm setter when it's struggling to enforce not only its values but its actual policies within its borders?
Thank you. I'll take a second question. Yes, please. And then Robert Cooper. Yeah.
Thank you. It's Tom Nuttall from The Economist. It's fascinating to hear that this conversation that has been stuck in Europe for years now actually seems to be moving, and the Commissioner has told us about the tools with which Brussels has armed itself, mainly on the financial side, and Clément Beaune on the investment that the French presidency will make. But it seems that there's potentially a third bit of the puzzle, which of course is that we have a new German government, and the coalition deal has some very robust language on rule of law in Europe. And the Green Party, of course, have been very tough on this rhetorically in recent years, and they seem to have got their way in this coalition deal. So I wondered if I could ask, particularly Commissioner Jourová and Clément Beaune, if they have any views over whether this change of government in Germany, previous government not always having been especially helpful on these issues, could actually make a significant difference in this discussion. Thanks.
Thank you. Very good. Robert Cooper.
Thank you very much. I think this is really a critical area of discussion in the European Union at this moment. It's very welcome to hear that President Macron is going so quickly to Budapest. I wonder if he would consider raising another rule of law issue there, and that is the presence of Nikola Gruevski in Hungary. If ever there was a man who breached European law, it was Gruevski, and he is now being sheltered by Viktor Orban. So perhaps that could also be raised.
Thank you. Clément Beaune, if you want to answer.
On the last issue, I guess it would be raised. I would depend, of course, on the discussion between the President and Viktor Orban. They will have a tete-a-tete. I think they will cover a lot of difficult issues also in this format. On the 2 questions briefly that I think Tom and Tara mentioned, as a kind of, I think it tells a lot about the evolution we are living through these last 2 to 3 years. As I said, and I agree with Tara Varma on this, for a reason we know, because we did not expect this. We have a toolbox which was a bit empty at the beginning. The tools we had were a bit soft, again, because the assumption of the EU treaties, of the whole EU political project, was that there were countries who were coming together, joining the club later, and sharing all of them in a large consensus these values, which were seen sometimes as a bit boring in a way, because it was obvious that everyone was in favor of equal rights between men and women, protecting minorities, non-discrimination, respecting freedom of the media, freedom of the justice, all the elements which are building rule of law in our democracies. And we see that it's not the case. And again, it's a big problem with Hungary and Poland, with a consistent strategy which consists in weakening these powers or counter powers, which are justice, media, universities, and so on and so forth. But it's a broader issue. I really insist on that. It's not to be nice and diplomatic with Poland and Hungary. It's true. We have a political issue all over the EU. Where I am optimistic is that we are aware of this issue, because for years we have been, I speak of the French debate, but I think it does apply to a lot of EU countries. In the press and political debate, we were looking at this as if it was something temporary, something not so important and quite far away. It's not. And all the efforts, all the debates we have this morning, and Věra is working very hard on that. I think we are a few fighters on this, to say this is vital for the EU. This can happen everywhere. We cannot tolerate even minor breaches of rule of law, because it can lead to a much broader attack on democracy. All this is now a huge awareness across the EU. I just want to take one example. We had a consultation on 50,000 young people between 15 and 30 years old in France between May and July in the framework of the Conference on the Future of Europe. It was the broadest consultation we've ever made to young people on Europe. And the biggest topic in all French regions, which is quite interesting, so it's not only 2 or 3 big cities, was values, with very concrete proposals on protecting women's rights, equality between men and women, protecting minority rights, justice, independence, support for the media, and so on. All this was there with a strong awareness. I'm totally sure, of course it's a feeling, that 5 years ago, 3 years ago, the same consultation would not have led to the same result. And this topic would have been far lower on the European political agenda. So we are aware of this. We are fighting for this. There are forces everywhere, and we see through elections that against corruption, against parties which are attacking the liberal democratic model, there are resistance and also backfires. So this is, I think, positive. That doesn't mean that we have to stay with our toolbox as it is. And I took the example of this conditionality regulation, because the fact that in the very summit we agreed on the recovery plan, which was already a huge step forward, a lot of member states, and in the end a unanimous agreement was there to say we also need rule of law to be part of this historical step and fiscal budgetary response, is a positive signal. Of course, we had then again debates, especially with Poland and Hungary. We will have, I think, a working additional tool in the coming weeks in the hands of the Commission and the Council. We are ready to use it. And it's again a good signal that we are not only aware, but active in this direction. It doesn't mean that these problems will be solved like this. That's why I was overnight, or with one tool, or with sanctions. It's broader than that. It's deeper than this. As I mentioned, we have to address the issues of the backtracking of some liberal values in our current EU, across this EU. But there is a fight that we are now fighting to protect our liberal democratic model. And I think we need, and we should be optimistic in this respect.
So, Bogdan, Klich's question, will President Macron meet Peter Márki-Zay?
Sorry. This is being discussed, but there will most likely be a discussion and a meeting with the oppositions.
Okay. And the German, what are your expectations on the German coalition contract?
Yes, excuse me, I didn't miss this part. No, it's part of this context, this context which creates, for me, optimism. Answering Tom's question on this particular point, yes, indeed, we see that in the new German coalition, the emphasis is much stronger on rule of law. We discussed yesterday, Jean-Yves Le Drian with Annalena Baerbock, myself with my new German counterpart. It was a key topic on the European agenda. So I think that Germany will be keen, and I do understand the reasons, and we are sharing this to some extent, to keep an open channel of dialogue with Poland in particular. And this is necessary to keep this political dialogue. Chancellor Scholz, who's now in Paris, will be in Warsaw on Sunday. Annalena Baerbock is in Warsaw, I think, today. So it's a signal of dialogue, obviously. But I think we will see the public messaging as well, that the German government will put rule of law at a much higher position on its European agenda, I'm sure.
Thank you very much. Věra, Jourová, your perceptions of all this?
Yes, I think that with the new German coalition will come inevitably new dynamics. I can be happy when I read the agreement, the coalition agreement. I saw a lot of emphasis on my things or on the things which I work on. So of course I am looking forward to cooperation with the new government. And it's fascinating on Europe that in fact we have permanent, what I would call fluid political reality. With all the changes in the member states, but at the end of the day, we all have to come to the meaningful and feasible compromises. But coming back to Germany, indeed, I believe that there will be a strong support, especially for the protection of rule of law as a founding principle of the EU. If I may say something about whether I feel the sense of being powerless. It was Madame Tara, I think, who asked about that. No, I don't think we are powerless. I even think that we use everything what we can to impose the rules. But I have to remind us of what I also admire on Europe, that we are using many different methods to keep united. The first is dialogue. The second, or while having the dialogue, permanent seeking for compromises where possible, strengthening trust. Again, I'm still in the chapter of dialogue. Then what Clément said, that we should not speak about sanctions but incentives. This is still I'm still in this toolbox, and we have in hands, and we are using it. And the sanctions are the last resort after we are absolutely sure that the sanctions are legally justified. So we are using everything we have in our hands, and I have to say that when I read sometimes the rhetoric or hear the rhetoric, especially from Budapest, but also from Warsaw, that Brussels is a new Moscow and that we behave like Soviet Union, I have to say I sharply reject this. As somebody who remembers the life in Soviet Union satellite, I was 4 years old when I saw the Soviet tanks in my street. Believe me, this is not the same thing. And I have to protect what we are doing and explain again and again that we are using all the tools to convince and to come to terms, to find compromises. And the power in the sense of Moscow, forget it. This is not a union. And this is not what we want. And I'm definitely sure that it will not happen.
Thank you for addressing this comparison. Yes, Bogdan, Klich, you
very briefly.
Yeah, and and also, do you agree that there's a sense of hope maybe now on this issue?
Yes.
Or an opportunity. Yeah.
But I would, at the beginning, I would like to wish both the European Commission and the French presidency every possible success. Not only in this area, I mean in the area of the rule of law, but also in the other areas that are crucial for development of the European Union. I'm concentrated in my professional life more on security and defense. So you know that the future of European strategic autonomy is in the reinforcement of institutions of common security and defense policy. And you have partners in my country, mainly in the opposition, advocating for establishment of the European Defense Union, as well as European Security Union. So this is not only in the portfolio of two commissioners within the European Commission, but also in our perspective for the future of the EU capabilities in this area. So you have partners, and we support, you know, those issues very strongly as an opposition in Poland. So, and we also remember that the future is in the hands of our citizens, that the European institutions can only support what is going on in Poland, in Hungary, what can happen in other countries. And such promising signals that come from Warsaw from the beginning of this week, that every political party represented in the House and in the Senate signed together with the street opposition and NGOs concentrated on the independence of judiciary, signed a declaration supporting the draft act renewing independence of judiciary. These are good signals, as well as crowds in the streets of my country and Hungary to some extent as well, supporting independence of judiciary. So from that point of view, you are strongly support, and we need your support for the main task that is in the face of our nations, our citizens. It is to renew the independence of judiciary as quickly as possible.
Point taken. And so we reached the end of our panel, but I won't leave without asking Minister Clément Beaune whether he expects, do you think this rule of law issue will be also an important issue in the French presidential campaign? And do you think that Emmanuel Macron will also have to fight on this?
If it's a way to ask about a potential candidate in France, I would not approach it this way. But on substance and seriously, it's yes, I think it will. Maybe not with these terms exactly. Maybe it will be more about values, the role of Europe in comparison or in opposition, some say, with French rules, French values, French identity, which I don't believe in 1 second. But the idea that Europe will be at the center of the campaign, yes, I believe in this. Of course, I'm a bit biased, but it will be because we saw already the primary pre-campaign discussions and debates within the right-wing parties and the far-right parties in France, that it's very fragile. Every time there is a temptation which remains, even for so-called pro-Europeans, former commissioners, former ministers of pro-European presidents and so on, who say, oh yes, now I understand the problem of our country is the European treaties, the European Convention on Human Rights, or the EU treaties, because they are constraining our action on migration, because they are willing to impose primacy of these rules. Of course, when you are part of a project, if the common rules do not apply, you have a big problem. So let's be honest and say, if they believe so, that they don't want to be part of the European project. So there's a lot of inconsistencies, scapegoatism, if I can say, about the EU and all European rules. This is not new, but unfortunately, it comes back every time there is difficult debates on identity, on French values, on French destiny, or whatever. I think we will need, and we will be probably the only ones, the president's political family, in the French debate in the coming weeks and months, to defend consistently, not being naive, but being determined and convinced that we need to be strong on European values, because they are our values, that we need to be tough with the others, but also to defend this in our system, in our country, because otherwise, everything is closely linked. If you attack European judges, the day after you attack your own judges in your own country. We see that very clearly with people like Mr. Zemmour and others. It's clear, because they don't want to be constrained, into brackets, by law, rules, rule of law, and so on. And this is a key, vital democratic issue. Yesterday, just to finish on that, but I think it illustrates this debate that we will have, which is a European debate. Eric Zemmour said in a debate, the French people should not be constrained by law. Well, in a democratic system, it's better to be constrained collectively by law. Otherwise, we're constrained by force. anarchy, violence. I didn't think that people would still have this type of comments in 2021 or 2022 in our campaigns, but it is there. Yeah. So we will fight.
Yeah, this is another thing we hadn't imagined some years ago. Well, thank you very much, Clément Beaune, for taking the time in this important day in Paris. Thank you for being with us. Thank you very much, Věra Jourová. And
thank you.
Next time you speak to Václav Havel, give him my regards, please.
I will.
Good luck with your negotiations. And thank you very much, Bogdan Klich, for being here with us. Thank you. And now, Carl Bildt is going to close this conference. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.